How can socially conscious people like us, how can we fix our broken financial system that currently favors big banks, traditional corporations, and the super rich to a system that looks out for us average American citizens without using politicians or regulations? This is the question we ask on the Crowd Effect podcast. I am your host, Paul Lovejoy, activist investment advisor at Stakeholder Enterprise. In 2008, America's largest bank failure happened. And it was devastating to millions of Americans. And it wasn't just an American crisis, this was a global crisis. But in America, two very large movements were spawned, came out of this crisis. One of them started in 2009, where uh, people who were angry started to protest town hall meetings where local politicians, were talking to their members of their community, the people who they represent. They also took to the streets, and this group was very angry about how they felt that uh, government was protecting these large big banks, and that the government was bailing out these banks while average citizens were getting the short end of the stick. And I could certainly relate to that because that's how I felt in 2008 as well. I didn't think it was fair that the big banks were getting bailed out, and I was financially ruined in 2008, and it didn't seem right. And so this group was angry, and they wanted to elect politicians that would clean out the government, the people in the bureaucracy in the government that allows and protects these corporations to do what they want. Um, Now, this group ended up colliding with another group that also spawned out of the 2008 financial crisis, and nothing, their political objectives were never achieved because of this clash with this other group. Um, uh, Now, here, this other group, um, they started to protest in Zuccotti Park near Wall Street, and they were having slogans of the 1% is being favored. Corporations are exploitative in nature, and we need to do something to stop these banks and corporations because they're getting bailed out, and us average American citizens are stuck with nothing. And they had slogans like "We are the 99%," and they wanted to have things like to force corporations to have minimum wage, to raise the minimum wage was one of their demands, and ultimately their political objectives weren't achieved as well because they clashed with this other group. Now, the first group I talked about, you probably guessed it was the Tea Party movement, which now is largely credited with um, turning into the nationalist or populist movement of the Republican Party, the nationalist and populist wing of the Republican Party. And you probably guessed that the second group was the Occupy Wall Street group, and they now are credited. This movement is credited to create the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Republicans love to call them the woke wing, things like that. So, what do these two groups have in common? Well, first of all, they're both angry in nature. Both of them were angry at the situation, and I get that. I was angry too. Um, you know, I didn't feel like it was right, and and I was angry. But here's the problem with being angry. Whenever we're angry, and I could certainly attest to this, there's this internal discomfort that we have inside, and we want to release that discomfort because we don't want to hold it in. And so oftentimes we'll throw it on to somebody else. Um, and then now they have this internal discomfort and they don't want to have that, so they'll throw it on somebody else. And this, from my point of view, this is exactly what was going on with the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement. They both were angry at this crisis that happened where millions of Americans got screwed, while big banks, they brushed themselves off, they got bailed out, too big to fail. The rest of us were too little to care about. Um, and they had this in common, but instead of trying to work together to solve a problem, instead they both of them are trying to force the change through politics. We need to force the other side because the other side's at fault. They're to blame, and um, if only we could force them to do what we say, then all of our problems will be solved. Okay, so we're talking about anger and blame, and that never sits well when you're the target of the blame or the anger. It's just a never-ending cycle of anger and blame. And in 2016, it kind of came to a head for me, anyways, to be like, this isn't working. Um, the Tea Party movement, they're just angry. The Occupy movement, angry. Everybody's angry, and nothing is happening. Um, so I really started to look into just reactions, human reactions, and I studied. There's two people. One is a philosopher and spiritual teacher. The other one's a evidence based, data driven PhD. That is a founder of corporate culture shaping firm, and essentially they were both saying the same thing. Um, we when we react, it's through emotion and fear, and it's largely unconscious. We Something happens to us and it's a reaction. uh, on the other side, if we respond, we think about it. It's thoughtful, it's conscious, and it's a desire to create something, create a solution. So So that made me think, okay, the Occupy movement, the Tea Party movement, that was just a base reaction of being angry at a system without really thinking it through of the solution. And both Tea Party and Occupy movement are demanding that our politicians do something. They're demanding politicians do something. So what happens when there's a demand? Well, then supply goes up. All right. That's how the world works, supply and demand. Um, uh, the progressives are demanding more regulations. So, guess what? The supply of regulations happen. Um, Nationalists and populists, they're demanding politicians that want to drain the swamp. So it is, and to stop um, liberal agenda, the liberal media, to stop the woke capitalism, the woke corporate. So um, uh, and so we have a big supply of these types of politicians now, supply and demand. So and nothing's getting solved because it's just a clash. It's just a clash happening. So the problem is that ultimately, when we look to our politicians and we look to our government to solve our own problems, we are trying to force the change because that's all government can do. All they could do is make laws and regulations to force the change. Um, so what other choices do us average American citizens have? Because in the end, 2008 banking crisis, nothing has changed. 2023, now we have the second and third largest banking failures in American history. And if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, I can't go into detail right now, but it's going to happen again. Bank runs will happen again, and banking failures will happen again. Um, and it's because it's not our laws that needs to have to be changed. It's our behavior that needs to change. Now, what I'm saying is, yeah, it can sound naive, and it's easier said than done. But today, with technology, with the internet, and this explosion of ideas that is happening out there, there is a great opportunity for us. For one, I've mentioned that this too big to fail concept. It's a concentration of wealth, and we're putting all this money into our banking system, and our banking system's for profit, and there's this constant pressure to constantly increase the profits every quarter, and so there's cutting corners and increasing fees and things like that. Well, instead of putting our money into this type of system, we have a choice to put it into credit unions, which are nonprofit, and instead of since they don't have profits, they don't their net revenues, they're not investing them like Silicon Valley Bank did, which led to their collapse, um, or Lehman Brothers, which led to their collapse. Instead, the credit unions, they pump back their net revenues into the credit union to help the community, to provide loans that have less fees, to provide services that are free, like financial counseling. So that's one way we could be the change, is simply by us taking our deposits and putting them into a nonprofit system, where it's not about trying to make as much money as possible, but instead it's about serving the community, which ultimately is what we want. The other thing, credit unions are small. There are some larger ones, but they're still it's dispersed. And there was this, just because these two banks failed, there was the stock market crash. It triggered there's all these things. Well, credit unions, they don't trade on the stock market. Okay, so that's one way we could be the change. Another way is by becoming the bank ourselves. This is what I was talking about with technology. We have the ability now to be lenders. In 2015, the laws have changed to allow just regular, average, general public Americans to have access to private lending. So what this means is that through these crowd lending platforms, um, anybody now with as little as $10 can become a crowd lender and loan money, instead of letting having banks loan the money. And they're trying to exploitive companies. Now we can lend money to small businesses, or we can lend money to people to help consolidate their debt. Um, and by doing so, anytime you or I are lending money, uh, we're not creating money. This is what happens when banks are lending money. This is how money gets created. Um, they're allowed to loan money based on the amount of deposits that their account holders have. So if a bank has $100 billion, and they're only allowed to loan a percentage, they have to keep some in reserve to prevent bank runs. Let's say 10% sometimes. So if they have $100 billion, they're allowed to loan $90 billion. Okay, here's another problem with the banks. Right now, our reserve requirement is zero. So they're not required to have anything held in reserve. So you don't think a bank run won't happen again? I think that is a naive point of view. Um, so we have um, this money creation that's constantly going on, and banks, they want to create as much money as possible because it increases their profits, and that way because they're under this pressure to every quarter to increase their profits, so they're going to loan as much money as possible. Well, if you are loaning money, we're not creating it, we're actually loaning our own money, and no money gets created, and it it doesn't create the systemic inflation problem that we have. You know, it, not counting this horrible inflation period we have right now, the dollar is constantly losing value. All currency constantly loses value, and that's when there's too much money supply, too much money gets created, and businesses can't keep up with this money creation. There's not enough goods and services um, to counteract the supply of money. Well, crowd lending, like I said, that doesn't happen. Um, and the other great thing is that it decentralizes the banking system to be spread out among all Americans. There isn't this concentration of wealth and power, also, and this way we can start solving our own problems. And if you think there's too many regulations, well, you can increase the demand by solving the problem, by becoming a crowd lender. If you think that politicians have too much power, well, you can um, solve the problem by um, eliminating their need to do something, by solving the problem your own. If you think corporations have too much power, if you think banks have too much power, well, you can erode that power by becoming a crowd lender and disperse it among all of us. So this is why I'm so passionate about crowd investing, and I see it as a fundamental underlying way that we can fix our broken financial system by being our financial system. Our financial system is broken because we're not a part of it. The banks and the corporations are, and small businesses and small entrepreneurs. We're just on the outskirts, and the labor, just regular people who are working. We don't have a say in politics on the big picture. We don't have lobbyists working for us, and so it's a frustrating sense when you feel powerless. But through crowd investing, you're regaining that power, uh, with the ability to fundamentally uh, change the way things work. And so instead of reacting to our financial markets with crowd investing, you are being proactive, and now the market has to react to us by and what are they going to do if more people are crowd investing, more people are crowd lending? Well, there's going to be more platforms that pop up to uh, come up with the supply, because now there's this demand that's happening. If we're demanding, hey, we want more platforms to crowd lend, then the supply will go up, and that way we have access to even to loan different types of money. So this is again why I'm so passionate and love crowd investing. My name is Paul Lovejoy. I am a crowd investor, and I see you are one too. If you'd like to know how to fix our broken financial system democratically without divisive protest or political actions, go to stakeholderenterprise.com.